Finally, I've become a data smith and I gain access to my brand new Castellan robot. And it's only 3,000 years old. Nice. Oh, I prefer the old Thanatar myself. God, I love this big old thing. Thanatar? Yeah, all that new tech may be nice and stuff, but nothing can beat a good old plasma mortar and graviton ram. Plasma mortar. Yes. And, how old is it exactly? Oh, about, 12,000 years, give or take. 12,000. Yeah, it's a pretty old piece of tech, but it still kicks around good, don't you, boy?
Beep boop, protect the fleshy little babies.
So, what does yours do? Beep boop. So this is what inadequate feels like. Salutations Rangers, General Bradley 101 back again with some more lore, and in today's video I am giving you 5 particular reasons as to why 30k's AdMech would absolutely trounce 40k's AdMech in the form of 5 units that just truly are the best creations of the AdMech. So in this here video we're going to take a look at the 5 best units in all the AdMech, and these units not only are better than anything the AdMech has concurrently, but they give you a little bit of insight as just how OP the Mechanicum was, and if not for a certain someone,
I'm a sick fuck. I hate human rights.
What we may have had today. But without any further ado, make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that wonderful YouTube stuff. Do all that wonderful YouTube stuff. Check out my boys Alex and Tom. Get Mr. Tom to 1,000 subscribers and the Gaming Storager to a bloody grand good old 30k and myself to 20k. This is going to be a bit of a rough thing, but if we can hit 20k subs by the end of this year, I will, on the last video that I release of this year, for every like it gets equals 1 minute of a live stream. There we go. I've done that. So I will make sure to announce whichever video that is, but every like equal 1 minute of live stream. Please like the video, but also don't like it too much. I don't want to die. Thank you very much. But without any further ado, let's take a look at the top 5 reasons, aka units, as to why 30k's Mechanicum would blow Warhammer 40k's AdMech out the water.
Number 5.
So at number 5, we have the Acastus Pattern Knight, aka the Titan Knight. So everyone knows that the line between Knight and Titan gets a little blurry, especially with the big old chunky Dominus classes. But did you know that during the Heresy, there was a literal Titan-sized knight? I present to you the Acastus class knight. So the Acastus was a unique take on the knight. It was, as I said, just as big as a Scout Titan and held enough weaponry to absolutely pummel any other Titan, or in fact, castle walls, in particular, mind you. So this knight here was unique in that it did use advanced technology and was incredibly rare, but it was rare because of the production means, not because of its actual components. You see, if you compare a Warhound Scout Titan to a Knight Acastus Titan, and you take the Knight Parion variant, which has the twin-linked magma las cannons, it is actually relatively easier to produce. In theory, at least, 2 to 3 times easier. Now, would that actually translate into production? Probably not, but here we see already, with this particular class of knight, that the AdMech, the Knight Houses in particular, possessed a lesser creation compared to a Titan that could do the job of a Scout Titan. And in some cases, much better. Again, this brings us into the idea of, hey, if the AdMech was able to recreate their systems and stabilize their work output and, make safe their lines, they would then be able to take this knight and then multiply it, reduce it, refine it, and chip and change whatever they needed to, so that eventually we would get to a point where we could have these essentially knights who could cost some production of a knight, well, a very, very expensive knight, mind you, but still, yet still be less than a Scout Titan. Now, anyone who's ever worked in any form of military will tell you, having multi-role capable war machines, especially cheaper ones that can hit above their weight, is a very, very, very good thing. So, one of the main reasons why the Knight Acastus went away was because the Imperium lost that sacred right of production. You see, when Horus did his little heresy, these things were basically completely nearly lost, because the Imperium was on the verge of rediscovering that tech. They hadn't fully implemented it yet. So, when the Horus heresy happened, basically everything went to shit. So, anything that was even remotely difficult to maintain was immediately thrown out in the first few years. I mean, hell, that's how we get the example of Mark V Heresy Plate, which is quite literally a mishmash of Marks 1 through 4 and 6 pattern armor. Basically anything that could protect you was used. So something like the Knight Acastus, which at the time was relatively rare, but in theory and in somewhat actuality was actually a lot more easy to maintain, just fell apart because they didn't have the time or the material to keep it up with it. Which is really sad because, as we see, the greatest loss of the heresy was that plenty of technologies that should be abundant were just reduced to nothing. Because, as I said, it's kind of hard to worry about this super cool advanced piece of tech when you have a, psychotic, possessed, demon, space marine, demi-human who's trying to rip you apart. You don't really care much about the super fancy gun. Hey, this las cannon is simple, you pull the trigger, it goes away. Las cannon it is. But that's pretty common when it comes to talking about the heresy. It lost its ability to reproduce and technology because it just couldn't keep up with the demands of a galactic scale war. But here's the second thing. You see, a lot of Acastus Knights bore a particular heraldry amongst them, that known as the Shrouded Urn. The Shrouded Urn was a mark of pride/shame depending on how you viewed it, because it meant that that particular knight had slain another member of its house in ritual-sanctioned combat. This was very much disdained by the knights at the time, for slaying your brother even in ritualistic combat was pretty much unheard of. Usually what would happen is that you would disable his knight and you would force him to surrender. Generally speaking, if you killed him, that meant either 1, very lucky shot, or 2, you were trying to kill the poor bastard. In conjunction with this, that both the Porion and Asterius variants were purely ranged focus and incredibly heavily armored, this king gave a rise to a wretched reputation. The fact being that because it was so heavily armed, all it had to do was point its guns at whatever it did and just shoot. No skill, no anything, just pure murder. In fact, many houses actively shunned these heavier classes of knights because they viewed them as dishonorable. Even when the Mechanicum would try and urge them on, they would rather instead gain access to a Titan Legio, even for a small detachment or maniple, rather than actually investing in these heavier class of knights. Such was their disdain for these massive war machines. So whereas normally when you talk about the heresy, we see that the reason why something went away was because of giant explosions. In this case, however, it was due to giant explosions and a common quirk of humanity, aka we like what we like and we don't like what we don't like. The nobles of the knight houses detested this knight. So this is one of those rare cases that even if the heresy hadn't happened, these particular knights would still be shunned and wouldn't actually be implemented today, which is a shame really. As I said, having a Scout Titan firepower and armor in minuscule size, even if it's half the price, that's still a worthy investment. Though, sadly, human beings would rather die than do something that they don't like to do. Not a meme, literal human history, and I can understand that. But it's just a pity we won't see these chunky lads anytime soon. Unless you count homebrew, which I do. Side note, if you hate homebrew, why? What is the difference between someone at GW making lore and a person at homebrew making lore? It has GW stamp on it, and that stamp most likely costs $1,000. Fuck you, GW, and your oversized prices. And if you don't like homebrew, like it, read it, it's pretty good. So, what were these chunky fuckers armed with? Simple. They were armed with one of two things. You have the Porion, which were armed with 2 twin-linked magma las cannons, which as previously established, one volley of these could turn a regular knight into molten scrap. In addition to this, it was armed with an Iron Storm missile pods located on its carapace. Now this was much more directed at anti-armor/titan hunting roles. As I said, quad magma las cannons at anything, Titan or otherwise, will indeed hurt. Not to mention if you're firing this at an armored formation, goodbye. You can delete entire armor columns with one volley of this thing. We then have the Knight Asteris. The Knight Asteris was armed with quad conversion beamers. These are essentially a unique weapon in that where they project a beam of converted dense particle energy. They're kind of like PPCs from Battletech. Also, Battletech video coming soon, look forward to that, wee. And they are incredibly effective against fortifications. In addition to this, it had a Volatile mortar battery. This was a heavy-duty mortar battery that was able of absolutely shattering fortress walls, or what it was mainly used for, keeping the defenders in their bunkers, because this thing was anti-Astarte/automata level. In addition to this, both were armed with either 2 las cannons or autocannons as point defense, because yes, autocannons are now your point defense on something this chunky.
That's a huge bitch!
So whereas the Knight Acastus was generally something that wasn't really meant to be used, even if the heresy hadn't happened, for people who used them did not care for them, and in some cases actively shunned them. We can't say that about our next topic.
Number 4.
Next up, we have the one, the only, the Dominator class battle automata. So this was heralded as the ultimate battle automata, the cream of the crop, the pinnacle of the AdMech at the advent of the 31st millennium. This was created exceptionally on Mars itself and holds that distinct honor. It is a towering robot, and it is twice the size of the Castellan. So you know this one? Good old Among Us, sus. Lamau, you know this guy? Literally half this height. He is the little bro of this chunky lad. It is plain and simple and bloody crazy. So, the history of this chunky lad. Originally, battle automata have made up the core part of the Legio Cybernetica. The Legio Cybernetica being itself one of the oldest formations, even dating back to pre-AdMech. It is said to be the remnant of the interstellar robot legions of the interstellar human empire. So the original thing we have is what's known as the Conqueror class. The Conqueror class is a unique type of automata that was created particularly for frontline combat. However, it was starting to show its age at the time, so the AdMech decided that they needed a new type of automata, and they began creating it. How would they begin creating it? By simply discussing how to combine and adapt technologies and battlefield roles to make the best possible unit. And this took several standard years, because they are the AdMech. I mean, imagine a fucking conversation between a Magos and the motherfucking Ents from Lord of the Rings. Could you imagine that? So, they then went into developing. They wanted to make sure that this was the ultimate war machine. It could move at an above average speed. It could have heavy duty firepower, but mostly it would be heavily armored. It would be endurable. At the same time, they would ensure that due to its heavy armor, it would not sacrifice in the other two areas. However, the development of the Dominator would be interrupted by Xana. Xana was a ForgeWorld right on the very edge of the Segmentum Pacificus, and they had their own class of battle automata, that being the Ultrax class. So they decided to put forward this idea that, hey, this is actually the better one, let's use this, we already have it. However, it was later refused, because one, they didn't want to really just waste all the years of development that went into this, and two, they didn't really trust Xana. To credit to the Martian people, apparently the Dominator was far better than the Xana. Now, we don't really know exactly how much about this, but needless to say, Xana was not too keen about being snubbed like this, and took the insult rather personally, and some people have argued this is part of the reason why they may have joined the Horus heresy on the side of the traitors. But that's a little bit of speculation. So, what made the Dominator so unique? It was basically the perfect all-rounder. However, it had one unique function, that being of a line breaker. You see, the Dominator was designed to stay firm and just take hits, and wait and wait and wait until the Magos had perfectly calculated when the time was right to give the enemy a swift kick right up the nuts. To this end, its battle plate was heavily armored, in some cases said to be just as strong and as powerful as the Contemptor Dreadnoughts of the Legio Astartes. Thus, in combination with shielding, it was able to withstand a hail of onslaught. Its shielding was of particular note, as it was atomantic in nature, meaning that it came directly from the core of the machine. While this means that the core had to run double duty in both powering the unit and shielding it, it meant that it could not be disabled. The only way to destroy the shielding was to destroy the unit in its entirety, which was incredibly difficult. In addition, for defense, it had a missile launcher mounted on top of the carapace. This was usually armed with either frag missiles and would create a hail of shrapnel that would absolutely rip apart enemy infantry. It could also be armed with crack missiles for anti-armor duty or flak missiles for anti-air duty, ensuring that whatever came its way it would hold, and hold well. But what makes it a shock trooper, I hear you ask? Simple: gravity. Or two massive graviton hammers. These are the smaller version of the graviton ram used by the Thanatos Siege Automata.
More on that later.
So these massive hammers gave it an incredible melee capability, and we have several records of it being able to go one-to-one and destroy Legion-class dreadnoughts as well. This thing was able to knock down walls, tanks, armor of any variety. It was the ultimate weapon, being both capable at ranged and melee, and withstand all types of fire and deterrent. This implacable definition of war robot would stand defiant, taking whatever it needed before using its massive gravity hammers to crush and destroy the enemies of the Omnissiah. This truly was the ultimate battle automata. And indeed, this unit has been hailed as the pinnacle of Martian ingenuity and mechanical prowess. And after seeing this in action, I have to very much so agree. In addition to this, we have a notable variant, that being the Domatov Ferrum pattern, aka when Puerto Robo took a little bit too ritually when Biggie say, hey, go and make some friends. These were 6 modified Domatars that swapped out the missile launcher for a pair of twin Mauler bolt cannons, and the Gravitine hammers for a giant fucking storm shield and one singular Graviton power hammer. Needless to say, these were incredibly chunky motherfuckers. Also, depending on what you may note, some of them think they may have some AI in them. Depends. I mean, I don't think Perturop would have given a fuck, and yeah, pretty cool. Sadly, however, this technology has completely been lost to the Imperium and the Mechanicum as a whole. And again, it's one of those things that is incredibly sad, because right before this heresy, this was developed, and it was said to be capable of being produced in bulk, meaning that they were already refining it for mass production. Unlike our previous entry, if the heresy hadn't happened, this would have been a massive staple of Legio Cybernetica and Admech Tagmata. And it should be. I wish it was. This is cool. I appreciate this. Now, on to number 3.
Number 3.
Number 3 is another battle automata and one of the stars of today's skit. Ladies and gentlemen, I present you the Thanator class Siege Automata, the heaviest chunky fucker that you've ever seen. This chap was designed for one thing and one thing alone: siege. It is the heaviest class of automata that the Legio Cybernetica has ever been able to produce, and is said to be the size of a Leviathan siege dreadnought, and just as durable. The Thanator is the chunky son of Ryza, and when you find out what it's armed with, that will make sense. Though we don't exactly know exactly if Ryza was the first one, it is definitely the most prominent. And personally, it makes sense to me, because the main armament of this big chunky motherfucker is what's known as the Helibrax Plasma Mortar.
I beg your pardon?
So I want you to understand, this is a plasma mortar.
Stop. My penis can only get so erect.
This device is capable of lobbing plasma balls, quite literally the size of space marines, onto enemy positions kilometers away. For those of you who don't know, plasma in Warhammer 40k is the literal temperature of the sun, and when the particular plasma ball impacts, it has 2 stages. One, the initial burst, in which half of the spear destroys whatever it touches instantaneously. The second half, the top half of the spear, the one that did not make immediate contact, then explodes in a burst of liquid fire. Needless to say, the initial contact destroys whatever it hits. The secondary contact destroys anything around it. If you're infantry and get hit by this son of a bitch, you're dead. 7 different types of dead. Dead all the way to Sunday. The death shall encompass you, will make the Battle of Ypres look like a goddamn fucking picnic, motherfucker. This thing is hilariously devastating. And the funny thing is that these guys normally came in a maniple of 5. 5 of these chunky fuckers. And if the giant fucking cannon didn't get ya, don't worry. The twin Mauler bolt cannon will take care of you real quick. In addition to this, it had a habit of stepping on people. If you make a fucking Dom meme, I'm going to hurt you. I want you to know that. This is because that much like the Highlander of Battletech, look forward to that video, it had reinforced legs, as lugging around the giant fucking mortar and firing said giant fucking mortar took a lock out of you. So it would lock its legs in place and be able to fire and take the heft of such a chunky blast. In addition to this, it made it incredibly effective at fucking stepping on motherfuckers and punching you into the next generation. So how do you get worse than a giant plasma mortar, I hear you ask? How about a giant las cannon and a graviton ram? So the other variant, that being the Thanator Calyx class siege automata, is armed with a heavy Solex pattern las cannon. This essentially turns it into a long-range sniper, able to one-tap Predator tanks in one hit. This weapon is incredibly dangerous, but that's not why this lad is feared. He is feared for his graviton ram. This Dark Age technology weapon is incredibly deadly because it is quite literally able, on record, to have crushed similar size dreadnoughts in one hit. This is able to take all the kinetic punch able to be generated by the Thanator and then multiply it by a factor of 100, meaning that anything it hits will be crushed. So this is essentially more of an all-rounder variant of the Thanator. Whereas the OG Thanator was designed specifically for siege combat, This chunky lad is made to advance forward using its heavy las cannon to pulp you from range. When it gets into medium range, it pulls the smaller bolt cannons, and when it gets into melee combat, graviton ram straight up your ass. Very, very, very solid all-rounder. And while normally this would be my pick because I like all-rounder vehicles, I can't lie, that plasma mortar is giving me one hell of a fucking boner. However, there's one more class that we need to talk about, that being the Thanatos Sinus class. You see, this class of Sinus is a bit ill-omened. You see, there was a ForgeWorld of Istaban 3, and it hated Ryza because they had some sort of feud going on. AdMech worlds are kind of like that. They hate you, you hate them, pretty much. So they wanted to take their pride and joy, aka the Thanatos, and make their own. So they created the Thanatos Sinus class. However, Esteban had a lot of fucking ambition and not that much talent. Therefore, when it created its version of the plasma mortar, it was very, very unstable, and pretty much every time you fired it, it would self-destruct and usually take the automata with it. Combine this with the fact that the particular machine spirits imbued within this automata were said to be erratic and utterly malevolent. This type of unit was utterly shelved and completely done away with in disgrace. Again, another reason why Esteban, much like Xana 2, turned traitor. It's almost like actions have consequences, but when it's done right, the Thanatos Siege Automata is a fucking chunky lad, and god damn it, it looks pretty. Look at that son of a bitch. And I love it, God knows I do. But not as much as I love number 2.
Number 2.
Right, we have number 2, the Auxilia Myrmidon. The Auxilia Myrmidon are an order of combat tech priests. They are oriented specifically for heavy-duty assault. These are tech priests who believe that there is only one way to protect technology and information, and that's to kill the motherfucker who is trying to take yours.
Get that motherfucker!
These are tech priests who have dedicated themselves entirely to the craft of destruction, and in particular, they find themselves their own martial order. They're unique amongst tech priests, as where other tech priests dedicate themselves to the knowledge of learning. Even the Dominus class dedicates itself to learning how to kill. These guys dedicate themselves to being warriors in effect. Due to this, many of them have likened them unto the night houses often serving, and some would argue that maybe some of their influence has gone into them. But one thing is for certain, the Myrmidon tech priests are the incarnation of pseudo-mortal destruction. These tech priests are essentially what happens if you gave a Skitarii a whole bunch of fucking roids. They have augmented their own body, hilariously with heavy-duty cybernetics. Combine this with the fact that their own cortexes were often enhanced with heavy duties of cybernetica bordering on the Silica Animus. The Silica Animus is essentially the Mechanicum's name for AI, or abominable intelligence. You'll notice that in 30k there's a lot of line blurring there. They are incredible combatants, and because of that, they travel in sects, or what are known as ordos. They travel in small sects or companies, essentially like Roman bands of knights, and they choose where to fight. The Myrmidons have used their advancement of technology and augmentation to make them quite literally bigger and stronger than Terminators, as not only are they able to dwarf them in both size and strength, even in combat prowess, for accounts of Myrmidons able to hold up to 5 Terminators at once. This is due to their heavy augmentation, both in the fields of cybernetics and in some cases genetics. So there are 2 types of Myrmidons, that being the Secutors and the Destructors. The Secutors are the melee variant. They're armed with a massive omniscient heavy power axe, able to cleave space marines in 2. In addition to this, they have a refractor field, which is aka a power field. And they have 4 arms, or 4 hardpoints rather. 2 of them are heavy duty chunky arms to wield said heavy duty power axe, but in addition to this, they have 2 shoulder sponsons, which could be armed with either a Maxim bolter, which is a short chain but heavy duty rotary bolt gun. Very low range, but goddamn does this son of a bitch spurt like a motherfucker. In addition to this, you could have plasma fusels, plasma cannons, rad cleansers. Why not kill the motherfucker with radiation? Graviton gun, I'm going to turn you into paste, motherfucker, and the good old Volkite charger. Because I have a giant death axe. What's better with a giant death axe? Twin giant death rays. Fuck me, I love these sons of bitches. And the Myrmidon Secutors often form heavy-duty assault shock troops. They are able to form lines and breach. Notable particulates is that they were often combined with fast-moving units of Space Marines. That being the auxiliaries would punch through Space Marine lines with the other faster variants of assault squads and elite vanvet troopers being able to harass the flanks, conjoin them together and then smash them forward with the giant hammer that was the Myrmidon Secutors. Then we have the Myrmidon Destructors. The Myrmidon Destructors are the range variant, and they have specifically augmented themselves for one particular role, that being able to carry basically tank-sized weapons into combat. So we have the standards, that being the Volkite Culverin, the Irradiation Engine, some of these names like Jesus Christ, the Conversion Beamer, and the Graviton Imploder. But one unique variant amongst them is what is known as the Photon Thruster Weapon. So this particular weapon is said to grab onto the photon particles that are within the air, and instead of one massive beam, it instead unleashes several howling beams of needle-themed black energy. Now this is said to be able to pierce the most heaviest armored vehicles and warriors. Not much is known about this weapon, however when it's fired it's said to believed to be a sea of needle black flames that destroy armor, yet in some cases the armor itself is completely intact, but upon closer inspection there will be a singular entry hole pierced clean through in and out. In addition to this, they're armed with a power fist, because if somehow you manage to survive the giant fucking gun, I have a giant fucking fist to turn you into paste.
I cast fist!
In additionally, they could also be armed with grenades, because why not? And both the Secutor and Destructor have what is known as an infravisor, essentially heat vision, but elite heat vision. There is no hiding from these guys. They're going to turn you into paste. And we see that this is a heavy-duty elite version of the Skitarii, the elite of the elite, even better than Space Marine Terminators. But only if there was a way we could take this standard, good old Skitarii and just make him better, if only.
And finally, number 1.
We come to number 1, and in my opinion, the number 1 unit, the number 1 reason why the AdMech of 30k was so better than that of 40k. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Thallax cohort, or the Thallaxi. So what are these? These are essentially Skitarii on steroids. Whereas the Myrmidons were tech priests on roids, these are Skitarii on all types of roids and creatine and 7 scoops of pre-workout, because fuck you and your organs, I need to hit that fucking PR, motherfucker. So what in the name of the good golly Miss Molly is the Thallax cohort? The Thallax cohort is essentially him. You see him? He is in fact him. What do I mean by this? The Thallax cohort is essentially the evolution of the Skitarii. This particular unit is clad in what is known as the Lorica Thallax, which is cybernetically enhanced power armor. Now you see, the standard Skitarii has basic augments. Generally speaking, they have bionic legs, arms, and like some nonsense in the respiratory system here and there. Like good enough, but not exactly heavy duty. Here I present to you Warhammer 40k's RoboCop. As when a unit of the Thallax is created, it is removed everything except for the brain, the spinal cord, sensory systems, and some vital organs and viscera. It is essentially RoboCop, and depending on what sect, they may include a cyberdong, because, you know, you may be a robot, but that doesn't mean you can't have sex. Now, the level of these cybernetics depended on the particular Forge World. Not to say their effectiveness, all of them had the standard same effectiveness. What differed, however, was the, how do I say this? Yes, fucking caring about the particular occupant. You see, initially these were created by the Order Reductor. The Order Reductor being the 40k AdMech's version of Rico from Penguins of Madagascar, aka Kaboom Kaboom. They were the Destroyers Imperatus of the AdMech. They held the greatest, heaviest, most devastating weapons, period. If you needed something blown up in large amount of quantities really bloody quick, you called on these boys, and they would blow up everything particularly deadly. So it makes sense that given their nature of being heavy duty everything, they would want something heavier than the standard Skitarii, and something less expensive than the standard battle automata of the Legio Cybernetica. Hence they created the Lorica Thallax, which as I said is cybernetic power armor. And they would essentially trade out this design or whole cohort in exchange for favors and aid, usually from the Legio Cybernetica. So you would need to reconstruct an individual person around this. And basically cutting up and changing somebody may fuck with them a little bit. Just a wee bit. Notably, the internment into one of these cybernetic organisms would cause incredible difficulty on the neural minds. So the AdMech, as per usual, had 2 ways to solve this. Number 1, you quite literally remove the emotions of this unit. Not entirely, mind you, as they still have the tactical ability to remember, to think, and to experience on some level. It's just very, 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 very neutered. The same thing with what is known as their Jinn sight. Their Jinn sight essentially allows them to see and feel everything on the battlefield. They can tell the weather pressure, they can tell if it's going to rain, they can tell seismic interruptions, they can see how hot it is, how cold it might be. It basically allows them to know everything about their environment, at the cost of being able to see and hear as we normally would have. They instead see and hear via binary code. Now, this depends. Basically, if you have a ForgeWorld that doesn't give a fuck about its troops, this. However, in some cases where ForgeWorlds do in fact care for their Skitarii, such as Mars and Lucius, they instead were able to implement certain quality of life systems. Now, granted, you basically weren't living super duper happy, but you know, at least you could think and feel to a certain extent without fucking wanting to die, like more than normal, outside of combat that is. And you were able to see and hear like a relatively normal person. It depended, but this particular battle plate was basically based off Space Marine power armor. No, like quite literally. The Lorica Thalax was created in conjunction with the first generation of Space Marine Mach II battle plate. Thus, they shared literally the same components. I mean, you can take a look at some of the pauldrons of the Space Marines and the Thalax, they look pretty similar. And this was so potent to a point that often, when Tagmata of the Mechanicum worked with Space Marine legions, their tech priests would quite literally share battle plate amongst one another. They would have one giant stockpile to use for both the Thalax and Space Marines. In addition to this, it meant that Space Marines loved working with these guys and vice versa, because not only were they on the same scale and the same quality, but you could both draw resources from the same pool. That's incredibly valuable in a combat scenario. In addition to this, the Mechanicum was able to produce them with a unique compact energy core. This means that they could draw on that core to power some frightening weapons. And again, this core could indeed cause some harm to the fleshy bits that are in the Thalax, but it depends. Are you part of a forge? Fucking birds. But that depends. Are you part of a forge world that actually believes that Skitarii have value? You'll get the good shit. Are you part of the Ordo Reductor? Well, probably not. In addition to this, they were armed with a variety of things, including jetpacks, and their primary weapon, that being a lightning gun. A lightning gun, as it says, is a gun that is able to shoot forth a bolt of supercharged electricity, incredibly deadly against powered armor. And the best part about this, it can't run out of ammo, because it's directly connected to the core of the Thalax. Also, they had close combat weapons, which are usually in the forms of power swords or chain blades. Because what's more dangerous than a lightning-wielding cyborg Space Marine power armor dude? That same motherfucker, but with a giant-ass chainsaw sword. You could also swap out that heavy-duty lightning gun for a photon thruster, a multi-matter, an rad cleanser, a plasma fusel, or a multi-laser. Also, they can carry melter bombs, because why the fuck not? In addition to this, there were different types of upgrades. These upgrades would augment the certain type of Thalax cohort for a particular reason. You had Destructor if you really want to hit hard, Icarian if you really needed to move fast, etc., so on and so forth. But we're not done yet with the Thalax. The standard Thalax is the heavy-duty frontline unit. Then we have the Ursax. The Ursax is essentially the meth-fueled, roided-out motherfucker who likes the idea of cavalry. The development of the Uraxai traces back to a single chap, that being the Magos Explorator Ebion Falcon. Now, he developed this particular pattern of Thalax armor for his own need of his Explorator fleet. Now, initially, when all of his boys saw it, they were like, okay, it just seems to be a field-modified version of the Thalaxi. However, they differed in one major thing. That being because their role in combat. You see, the Thalaxi were designed as line-holder units or shock units. They were designed to maintain the line, to hit hard. They were your bread and butter. The Uraxai, on the other hand, were heavy-duty, fast-moving, close-quarter line breakers. These units were not designed to hold anything but the enemy's skull after they cut it in two, and they specialized in zone mortalis fights. While the standard power armor had a good chunk of radiation and anti-bad nonsense activity, this particular unit was even further heavily advanced, with protection against rad and chem-based weaponry. But their main thing was their particular jump pack. The heavy jump pack they had allowed them to move at the speed of Mach fuck, and they were armed with either heavy-duty power fists for turning armor into fuck, or lightning claws to turning everything else into even more fuck. Combined this, they had incredibly short range but viciously deadless Volkite incinerators. These were hilariously short-ranged, but they were able to melt through dreadnought plate. Combined with 2 of them being mounted in the chest, a common tactic of the Ursax, which would be launch on to some type of heavy armor, use its claws to dig into the side, Lamau, and then absolutely annihilate said dreadnought with a giant friendly motherfucking hug. Hence, I have coined these boys the Huggy Boys. And the worst part, or the best part depending on whether you're friend or foe, of these unique units is that they are cyborgs. And while, depending on how good they live outside of combat depends on the Forge World, in combat, they are able to learn, to read, to understand, and most importantly, to grow. Meaning, much like Skitarii, a veteran unit of Thalax or Urax is incredibly more deadly than their standard unit. And that played a massive part as to when the enemies of mankind face them, they would think them to be automata. The good thing about automata, you don't have to train them. Bad thing about automata, they can't be trained. Therefore they can't learn new things. So a lot of enemies of the Imperium got a nasty fucking surprise when they thought what appeared to be automata ended up moving like elite veterans and hitting them hard and fast. You gotta understand, these are cyborgs. Again, depending on which Forge World, how good the cyborg is depends, but in combat they're all the same. A cyborg is able to use tactics, think outside the box, and do dumb shit. I don't know about you, but if I had a motherfucker who is quite literally all balls, all brains, and no fucking flesh, moving in power armor with a lightning gun, the idea of him doing dumb shit will scare the piss out of me. And there we see, just like the Space Marines at the end of the Heresy, the AdMech had access to a unique unit. Just so as the Space Marines were said to evolve into Terminator armor wielding bastions, I believe that eventually all Skitarii would be turned into Thalax. Because again, the Thalax, it could be adapted and improved upon. Again, depending on the Forge World, it could be really good, just like Skitarii. In addition to this, why I also say it is because the #1 people who got turned into Thalax were Skitarii who had taken heavy-duty damage. In a sense, it was kind of like the Skitarii's version of a dreadnought, but much cheaper, much better, and far more easier to be used and maintained. The idea of a cyborg is so heavily taboo in modern 40k. I mean, granted, even back then people were like, yo, this is sus, this is silica anima, this is bad. But you'll notice people in 30k were way more willing to just fucking wave shit off. And I personally believe that when GW releases a Doc Mechanicum army, and GW needs to release a Doc AdMech army in fucking 40k, do it GW, everyone wants it, what is wrong with you? No thank you, I do not want another Space Marine lieutenant. We should get a messed up fucking demonic version of these guys. The Iron Warriors, I would love to see them with Thalax cohort, and dude, give me fucking word bearers with a Raxai that are just messed up. That would be such a good fucking thing to see. But all in all, we see here and we see now that through all of these units, they all have one thing in common. They possessed technology and they possessed tactics, and more importantly, a mentality that is foreign to the current AdMech. The current AdMech is indeed stagnating. And while we may throw that word around for the Imperium, we'd often see the AdMech get away with it, but that's only for people who've never read into AdMech lore. When you realize what the AdMech could do back in 30k compared to what they have now in 40k, it is a crazy difference. But the worst thing was how willing they were to accept new technology. The only reason why Cole has been able to get away with half the shit he does is because he has Gilliman. The AdMech on several occasions has threatened Cole with sanctioning him as a fucking heretic. The AdMech hates the idea of creating and crafting new technology. Back in the day, to create new technology, you would need to discuss for a couple of years. Now, if you mention the idea of creating new technology, you are branded as a heretic. The AdMech has stagnated. The AdMech has fallen off. The AdMech is not what it should have been. And just because they're better than the Imperium, we often forget that, hey, they fell off too. They took massive L's too, and they lost big time. By going over this, we see that the AdMech could regain some of this technology. And with Cole, they seem to be doing that. But how that will turn out, we don't know. But I, for one, want to see these fucking beautiful things back in 40k, because goddammit, if nothing else, they look bloody awesome. But ladies and gentlemen, that has been today's video. Let me know down below which one of these is your favorite, And I know I didn't cover all of 30k AdMechs, but hell, pick one and tell me which one you love ever so much. For me, it's the Verax Automata, because it looks like a Marauder. Yes, Battletech. I'm doing a Battletech video before the year is out. Look forward to that. But other than that, make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, do all that wonderful YouTube stuff. If you happen to particularly like this video, hit it a like, but if you really liked it, drop your boy a super thanks, join the memberships. We have some awesome stuff. Speaking of members, thank you to my beautiful members, Thomas Mo's Lawn, and The Gaming Storyteller. I apologize that I didn't mention it in the last few videos. I fucking forgot and I'm a dumb piece of shit. I love and appreciate you guys for supporting, and I love and appreciate you guys for watching. But, very important, you don't have to ever pay money. If you just watch every video I come out, even if you don't like the topic, if you just put it on the background, yeah, hell, even if the thing's on fucking mute. If you just watch it to support me, I love you. And you do more than enough for me and more than I deserve to ask for. So keep that in mind. You're beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Join the Discord, you can talk to me personally and do some nonsense. Also keep on the lookout. We have a D&D thing coming up. Yes, every single week I do awesome shenaniganery with my lovely, beautiful peoples that are the Dutch 40k and Tom, who is Imperial Servitor Dominus Prime, headed up by the wonderful Frosty the Nomad, DM extraordinaire. So if you want to see me wrangle a bunch of necrophilic, xenophobic motherfuckers who loves to steal and kill shit, then tune in every Saturday for the live stream. But as always, with that being said, I have been General Bradley 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank you oh so very much for watching. Make sure to stay loyal out there, boys and gals, and I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers! I love how that every time someone mentions female AdMech, they just make it fucking sexy. Even though it's like, in reality, they would be no different from the fucking tech priests. But, you know, I'm not complaining about the thick-thighed AdMech, and neither should you.